twisted paths of sustainability problems and dilemmas of socio-ecological change. 12 days after Donald Trump's re-election victory, talking about sustainability is not an easy task. After all, Trump is the representative of a far-right political movement that believes climate change is a fraudulent invention of liberal elites in order to better control citizens' life. The hostility of this extreme libertarian right is not only directed against modern democracy, which could be replaced by an autocracy of billionaires. With no less ferocity, all attempts at ecological change are to be stopped once and for all. The Trump administration will be a government that sticks to a fossil growth economy at all costs, thus contributing to push the planet to the edge of an ecological catastrophe. If decisive steps to mitigate climate change need to be taken in this decade, the new US administration will make sure that not a single step is really done. It is already prepared to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement and to approve new oil drilling at the expense of nature reserves. Since all of this is happening in a country that, along with China, is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, discussions about sustainability seem to be more hopeless than ever. So I'm not sure a talk on sustainability can be now anything other but deeply pessimistic and, in a way, wistful. A reminder of an idea that may finally be buried in the world of fossil fuels autocrats and crazy tech billionaires. Nevertheless, in my lecture, I will talk about sustainability in 4 steps. First, I will discuss the concept of sustainability itself and also its criticism. Secondly, I will present various development paths of sustainability, which I will then discuss in terms of their interrelations and their respective problems. Finally, I will take a closer look at the dilemmas to which an ecological turnaround in modern society is generally exposed, regardless of which development paths of sustainability are pursued. The massive damage that would be caused by a U-turn on climate policy, as is to be expected from the Trump administration, becomes clear if we once again consider what an ecological transformation is actually all about. This kind of transformation refers to a comprehensive social, economic, cultural, and material changes that might be able to slow down the climate crisis and stop the ongoing destruction of the Earth system. The core elements of such a transformation do not relate to social change alone. To ensure that an ecological transformation can actually succeed, above all, a fundamental change in the material exchange between nature and human society is needed, a new kind of social metabolism, as you want, so that human life and economic processes are not longer inherently destructive to our natural livelihoods. The concept of sustainability is at the center of such a socio-ecological transformation. In recent decades, sustainability has become an omnipresent light build of social change to which states, organizations, companies, and social movements around the world refer as a normative principle when striving for a climate-friendly and environmentally protective economy and cultural way of life. The United Nations 17 Sustainability Goals from 2016 are the best known example of this. The public debates on such sustainability goals address a wide range of issues. They revolve around the necessary changes in social practices such as nutrition, consumption, housing, and mobility, the debate about an economic system that is structurally dependent on growth, and matters of justice between generations and the global North and South. Questions of justice also lie at the heart of the concept of sustainability. They are summarized in the central idea that was already expressed in the best known definition of sustainability to date, the definition from the so-called Brundtland Report to the United Nations in 1987. Sustainable development, it says, seeks to meet the needs and aspirations of the present without compromising the ability to meet those of the future. As plausible as this understanding of sustainability may be, a number of problems associated with it have since become undeniable. In the late 1980s, the concept of sustainability was based on the assumption that irreversible ecological problems could still be avoided through precaution and preventive action. Today, however, it is obvious that serious ecological damage has already occurred or can no longer be averted. Contemporary societies will have to deal with the consequences of the age of fossil fuels for centuries to come. This requires a change in time horizons. While the sustainability concept of the 1980s was primarily aimed at the living conditions of the next generations, the temporal dimension of the Earth system are now under discussion. This means respecting the planetary boundaries for the survival of our ecosystems and refers to periods of time that far exceed the future of the next generations. Most findings from climate research now assume that the ecosystem's dangerous tipping points are approaching mass much faster than previously suspected. Accordingly, in a study published in September 2023, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research stated that of the 9 planetary boundaries within which humanity is within a safe operating space, 6 have already been exceeded and 2 more are at their breaking points. In the course of this escalation of the ecological crisis, the term sustainability itself has fallen into disrepute, as it seems to refer more or less only to the makeshift repair of an expansive economy and cultural lifestyle, the very foundations of which are not to be shaken. Such is a message, for instance, in recent influential books by the US-American human ecologist Jason Moore or the Indian historian of post-colonialism Dipesh Chakrabarti. According to these views, ever since its inception in the days of Prussian forestry, Sustainability has only served to optimize the production of goods for human consumption. The principle of not cutting down more than can grow back would not be about protecting nature, but about economic efficiency. Ich glaube, ich brauche. But as justified as critical questions about the concept of sustainability may be, it seems highly doubtful to me whether this criticism is really well-founded. Describing sustainability from the outset as the alignment of natural goods with market demands runs into the problem of retrospectively attributing to sustainability a capitalist logic that, in historical terms, had not yet been developed at the beginning of the 18th century. In sociology, this would be considered as a typical functionalist misinterpretation. In history, as a cardinal error of an historical analysis that interprets a certain development of the past solely on the basis of criteria from the present. Other critics point out that the term sustainability has become so vague and indeterminate that it is often just an empty phrase. Indeed, there is hardly any company, government, or institution today that does not claim to be sustainable in some ways, including those that do massive harm to it. But if sustainability is in risk of becoming a meaningless buzzword or a cover term for greenwashing, then, of course, the question arises as to what is left of it. In my view, however, we should not abandon the concept of sustainability. The reason is that despite the frequent randomness of its use, sustainability implies two fundamental ecological principles that we should not ignore. Moreover, these two principles can be used to critically examine whether business practices, corporate decisions, or government measures are truly sustainable or only claim to be so, while in reality they are not. These two principles that in my view form the inner core of sustainability are the principles of regenerativity and potentiality. The first principle, regenerativity, refers to the principle of striving for a balance between the consumption of resources and their conservation, so that the Earth system is not destroyed in the pursuit of human goals and the planetary boundaries are respected. The mere degradation of our natural livelihoods is therefore the opposite of the regenerative principle of sustainability. The second basic principle of sustainability is to ensure future development opportunities and to safeguard an inventory of future opportunities for action. That is the potentiality of an open future which should not be destroyed by the ecological crisis of the present. The opposite of this sustainability principle is a colonization of the future by the ecological devastation of the present. Thus, in my view, when it comes to examining sustainability claims, these two principles of regenerativity and potentiality should be the benchmarks for. This does not change the fact that in economic business plans and political programs, one and the same term of sustainability is linked to very different objectives. In order to distinguish these objectives from one another, our Hamburg Research Center has developed an analytical framework of 3 development paths of sustainability. As ideal types, we understand these development paths as modernization, transformation, and control. Ecological modernization regards itself as a socio-political strategy that seeks to use the institutions of modern society, in particular its economy, for ecological change. The core principles of modern societies, such as economic growth, globalization, and increased consumption, are beyond any dispute and adapted to meet ecological constraints. In this view, markets and competitions are not impediments blocking the ecological turnaround, but economic institutions that enhance efficiency and can be put to use for sustainability. Emissions trading is a best-known example of this. Accordingly, financial markets are considered efficient instrument for investments in sustainable assets. This financialization of sustainability has found expression in financial products such as green bonds or business strategies like impact investing. Concepts such as the European Union's Green Deal also assume that economic growth can be decoupled from resource consumption and the corresponding emissions with the help of technological progress. Technical innovations such as e-mobility or green hydrogen are examples of this. Sustainability is therefore not understood as turning away from economic growth, but as a prerequisite for its future. In recent years, the OECD, the United Nations, the World Bank, and the European Union have all proclaimed green growth strategy to be the path of their future development. As modernization, sustainability thus serves to adjust capitalist growth economy to changing environmental conditions. In contrast, the climate movement and countless climate researchers are calling for a radical break with our current growth-orientated economy and lifestyles in order to achieve a more sustainable society. The development path of transformation follows the perspective that the Earth system and its planetary boundaries cannot be protected by processes of further commodification of sustainability. The starting point of an alternative concept is the idea that economic activity and cultural practices must be tied to the protection of the natural foundations of life and forms of social reproduction that are based on the principles of the common good and sufficiency. Sustainability therefore requires a different understanding of nature, technology, prosperity, and cooperation. Transformation pathways to sustainability are based on overcoming growth imperatives and poorly instrumental relationships with nature, which puts the need for radical institutional change on the political agenda. In the face of increasing climate emergencies, many governments around the world, on the other hand, prevail the view that sustainability must be secured primarily through climate adaptation and by increasing resilience, because they actually believe the battle against climate change has already been lost. In times of environmental disasters, government policy then means trying to somehow control the worst effects of global warming. Heat waves, floods, droughts, and scarcity of food, water, and energy can push entire political systems into crisis. To prevent this, efforts are also being made to bring the geophysical process of the Earth system under technological control. This is documented, for example, in geoengineering to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or to reduce solar radiation to the Earth. Here, a future of sustainability is emerging that is quite often characterized by technical fantasies of omnipotence, although the technical development of geoengineering is still in its very early stages and is largely uncertain. In the control paths of sustainability, ecological catastrophes are to be counteracted by technological, military, and authoritarian means, as can already be read in some government guidelines on national disaster management. Politically, sustainability as control, therefore, carries the danger of an authoritarian regime in states of ecological emergency, tempted to suspend democracy, at least temporarily. That is why those states and governments that still deny the climate crisis today, tomorrow will be the first to take authoritarian measures when ecological catastrophes occur. Who bears the major consequences in the event of ecological shocks will become a question of political power. In this way, social elites can succeed in retreating into protected enclaves, while vulnerable population groups are defensively exposed to ecological threats. Sustainability through control is based on a policy of externalization and segregation. Strong population groups will increase their resilience to an extent that is by no means possible for others. Whether and in which way this analytical model of modernization, transformation, and control proves useful in sociological studies, whether it should be modified or adapted to new variants coming to the fore, or this is the topic of many internal debates at our research center in Hamburg. As a hypothesis regarding the current situation, it could be perhaps said that the development path of ecological modernization that would have had a favorable window of opportunity after the corona pandemic has actually been significantly slowed down in the last years. The energy crisis resulting from Russia's war against Ukraine, the recent election victory of Donald Trump in the US, or the collapse of the traffic light government in Germany are not the only example of this, but also the repeated failures to the world climate conferences, all of which were unable to even start to mitigate climate change. What the concept of ecological modernization has generally achieved so far is more than disappointing. In 2023, global greenhouse gas emissions hit a new record high. Oil consumption continues to increase every year, And last year, more coal was burned than ever before in human history. Not even green capitalism has been able to change these trends. In the US and the European Union, emissions have decreased slightly, but far too little to achieve the climate goals that these countries have set themselves. Public attention to climate change might create the impression that the age of fossil fuels has passed its peak, a misconception as evidenced by all current figures. The most recent climate research therefore concludes that with a 50% probability, the remaining global carbon budget to achieve the 1-degree target of Paris will be used up in just 6 years if nothing changes significantly. As of today, the global economy would have to be completely carbon neutral by 2030 to reach the 1.5-degree target, an entirely unrealistic assumption. Ecological modernization is trapped in many contradictions. If the economy were to be restructured under the premise of pursuing green growth, then resource consumption, emissions, and environmental damage could not be reduced sufficiently enough to slow down the climate crisis. But if climate protection were given top priority and energy prices were increased massively in order to drive fossil fuels out of the market, there would be immediate resistance from large population groups who would lose a significant amount of income because of high carbon prices. Climate policy would be the driver of increasing inequality and a further alienation from democracy. If, on the other hand, the goal were to achieve an economic redistribution at the expense of the rich in order to finance effective climate protection, the economically strongest interest would use their political veto power precisely to prevent this. Decarbonization would thus be pushed into the distance just as ecological emergency regimes could approach under the sign of an impending climate catastrophe. To the same extent that ecological modernization fails, fundamental socio-ecological transformation appear more and more unrealistic, apart from some progress in Scandinavian countries and in some local contexts. Instead, new ecological control regimes have emerged all over the world, conducting authoritarian disaster management in the wake of the escalation of the ecological crisis. One particularly serious example is the building of the new Indonesian capital in the heart of the island of Borneo, while the mega city of Jakarta is being buried in smog and literally sinks into the Pacific due to rising sea levels. As most of Jakarta's residents cannot afford to move, they are being left unprotected by climate change, while the Indonesian upper class can seek safety elsewhere. However, some shifts in the development path of sustainability can also be identified. While control used to be understood primarily as an authoritarian mode of segregation and discipline in preparation of ecological catastrophes, many voices in the current debates on climate change regard control as a positive ecological norm. If companies, citizens, and institutions are still unwilling to take the environment into account, there would be absolutely no way around implementing strict legal requirements for production, consumption, and mobility. Norms of self-regulation and state restriction are brought into the play against a narrow liberalist concept of freedom that includes nothing more than the maximization of benefits and an arbitrary kind of individual private freedom. More and more advocates of climate protection are also turning to concepts of planning or an ecological war economy whereby the state sets out strict ecological framework conditions. Regardless of how concepts like these might be considered, they indicate above all that ecological modernization has lost its plausibility if we really want to take climate change seriously. This is just one example of how the development paths of modernization, transformation, and control are intertwined, not only on the side of modernization, which itself can hardly abstain from control, but also on the side of socio-ecological transformation, which now appears less possible than ever without control strategies. Moreover, all of these sustainable development paths are bound up with problems that may ultimately counteract the respective intents. Green capitalism can be an obstacle on the way to ecological change, as it feeds the illusion that nothing fundamental needs to be changed. Strategies of externalizing and segregating ecological risk could in turn have opposite effects, provoking social unrest that can quickly put an end to the supposed safety of the elites. However, none of the development paths of sustainability, no matter how intertwined, will be able to escape the many unintended consequences, dilemmas, and paradoxes that characterize social change in general. But in the case of an ecological turnaround, there's also the unique constellation that modern societies actually have to change everything at the same time if they really to prevent the most severe consequences of climate change. This was exactly the argument put forward by the IPCC in its recent synthesis report of March 2023, in which the IPCC once again called for, quote, rapid and far-reaching transitions across all sectors and systems of society in the current decade to achieve, quote again, sustained emissions reductions and secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Any increase in global warming, be it ever so small, would drastically boost the risk of climate change, trigger cascades of probably unmeasurable states of emergency, and shut the window of opportunity during which it would still be possible to prevent the most serious ecological crises and catastrophes. The IPCC statement is followed by an extensive list of measures calling for sweeping and, in most cases, immediate steps to curb global warming and comprising practically all areas of economy, society, and politics. They include, among others, rapid decarbonization of industry, restructuring the financial sector towards sustainable investments, low emissions energy supply, mobility systems and infrastructures, biodiverse agriculture and global protection of water bodies, ecological restructuring the cities, strict climate governance in all political institutions, social actions to enhance resilience, and finally, reductions of consumption as well as behavioral and lifestyle changes. What governments, civil society, and private sector are being asked to do here goes far beyond everything that modern societies have experienced in terms of social change, and this in multiple ways. First, changes are not to be made incrementally, that is, gradually and step by step, but disruptively, that is, directly and discontinuing previous development paths. Second, not as a self-directed process that defies overall planning, but as one that is intentional and governed. And third, not as a series of society changes in individual areas at different times, but as necessary transformation in all areas of society at the same time. Another complicating factor is the global dimension of this rapid transformation, fundamentally affecting all societies worldwide, and in particular countries of Europe, North America, East Asia, and other major emitters. However, the conditions for initiating this transformation are completely different in each of these countries. Moreover, every implementation of transformation steps in one country is dependent on developments in other countries or regions of the world, just as the success of climate protection can ultimately only be measured in global terms, which individual countries can influence only to a limited extent. The Paris Climate Agreement addresses this global dimension of the ecological challenges by means of the system of temporal stages of emission reductions. Joint responsibility for the climate is to be executed through different speeds of reductions, whereby the countries that industrialized early on and those with the highest emissions are assigned a pioneering role. Nevertheless, the heterogeneity of global spaces induces a complexity, introduces a completely new level of complexity to the ecological turnaround never seen before. All over the world within just one decade does not become a realistic expectation if it is staggered over time. Taking a glimpse into the history of modern societies show how low the probability of such an ecological turnaround is, even in individual countries. Social change has mostly occurred as processes driven by internal dynamics whose complex consequences hardly anyone was able to predict, and which were often unintentional and occasionally even undesired. What is more, social change has often taken place slowly and bit by bit, and was noticed only when it had actually already occurred long before. Wars and revolutions are exceptions to such slow transitions, but it is true of them too that their consequences have rarely met the respective expectations. Finally, many areas of life have remained stable even in phases of accelerated social change, whereas others have radically changed within a short time. The ecological transformation, by contrast, intends to achieve a planned transition across the board in a short time because incremental changes are too slow and too uncertain to be able to limit global warming at least to less than 2 degrees. Furthermore, it demands simultaneous transitions across all sectors in society, since there's practically not a single area of society that does not contribute to climate crisis in its own way. In the age of the Anthropocene, the causes of global warming are intertwined with human activities to such a profound and complex extent that hardly any sphere of action can be excluded from the pressure to achieve rapid change. These simultaneous causes of climate change are matched by its catastrophic consequences, which are described in climate research as the simultaneous mega-crisis of a climate endgame. The ecological transformation is therefore situated in a circle of simultaneities, and we do not know whether it might prove to be a vicious circle. Through their emissions, practically all social systems are inducing climate change, which in turn can take the form of simultaneous extreme climate events. Climate policy can react only by attempting to change all these systems at the same time. When have modern societies ever been in a comparable situation where literally everything, from the rules of economic activity to technical infrastructure to cultural lifestyles, have been called into question? If within a decade the economy is to be committed to sustainability and political institutions to climate protection, if infrastructure must become emission-free and cultural lifestyles as sufficient as possible, then disruptive changes will occur in a variety, profoundness, and urgency that cannot be coordinated smoothly. One of the consequences of this unique, complex constellation is what I call the socio-ecological dilemma of simultaneity. When so many different things need to be changed as quickly as possible at the same time, countless dilemmas and trade-offs arise that obstruct ecological transformations. Since almost all of societal systems will have to undergo a profound transformation in a short period of time, such a comprehensive transformation will inevitably confront many powerful interests in society and provoke resistance from all sides. The tremendous scope of the ecological transformation gives rise to countless conflicts that cause heated arguments for literally every single measure in every conceivable area of life. The numerous conflicts that are, for example, currently being fought out in Germany provide a taste of this. After the last government finally wanted to push climate protection to some extent, energy costs, the Heating Act, carbon pricing and climate payments, the coal phase out and the expansion of the renewables, speed limit and e-mobility have become hot-button issues accompanied by heated media debates on meat consumption, air travel and mass tourism, consumerism and eco-bigotry, sacrifices and ban. The need to change everything at once lead to a situation in which everything is being disputed. In a situation like this, where the many conflicting demands and interests are in danger of blocking an ecological turnaround, it seems to me that the most reasonable approach is to start with the most important issue in climate mitigation, which also have the broadest support among the various population groups. This can only mean a determined reorganization of society's infrastructure, that is, the basic material supply of electricity, heat, water, transport, building, and energy based on compliance with planetary boundaries, ecological precaution, and the common good for all. In its judgment on climate protection from March 2021, Germany's Federal Constitutional Court called for precisely such a structural change. According to the court's decision, energy supply, production, buildings and transport all require binding climate policy guidelines that must become mandatory in just a short time. The most urgent climate goal of decarbonization would benefit best from this. In Germany, energy supply, industry, transport, agriculture, and housing account for 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Decarbonizing these infrastructure would do the most for climate protection. What matters here is organizing steps towards change, the implementation of which will equally strengthen a green economy, democracy, and sustainable lifestyles. Neither market-driven green capitalism nor ecological emergency regimes, and certainly not the countless appeals to individuals' ecological responsibility are able to accomplish this. What is more promising is to rely on the transformative leverage of sustainable and inclusive infrastructures. Since sustainable infrastructures as common goods contribute to overcoming fundamental ecological problems that cannot be solved by markets, the state, or individuals alone, they enable social alliances across conflicting interests and values. Infrastructure as commons contributes to social justice in the distribution of fundamental goods. It strengthens welfare, sustainability, and not least democracy without requiring a complete system change of capitalism that is simply unrealistic. On the twisted path of sustainability, this would not resolve all the problems and dilemmas of a socio-ecological change, but we would perhaps no longer be at its mercy. Being aware of the many dilemmas of socio-ecological change and acting accordingly could be a way to move forward on the path to sustainability after all. Thank you very much for your attention.